Today I'm going to discuss the most beautiful story, Hourn and the Sea. Hourn and the Sea is a story of 19th children by Salman Rushdie. It was Rushdie's 50th major publication and followed by the Satanic Verses. It is the phantasmagorical story that began in a city so old, Renaissance, that it has forgotten its name. सो ये जो स्टोरी है ये 90s के चिल्ड्रंस के बारे में है एंड 90s चिल्ड्रंस उस ईयर्स में जो चिल्ड्रंस होते थे उनके बारे में ये स्टोरी है बाय द सलीम रश्दी. इट वाज रश्दीज फिफ्थ मेजर पब्लिकेशन. ठीक है. एंड फॉलोड बाय द सैंटानिक वर्सेस एंड इट इज द phantasmagorical story that began in a city so old and ruinous and that it has forgotten its name. So the story whole revolves around the about a children and here is a family of Hourn and Rushdie and her beautiful wife Soraya and their neighbors. The neighbors are here like Mr. Sen Gupta and and his wife Mrs. Anita. The whole story revolves around these kind of character sketches, which is I explain it by in your answer. And here now we am going to start the whole story. How the Heron and the Sea is the story is an allegory for several problems existing in the society today, especially several problems existing in Indian society subcontinents. It looks at the problem from the viewpoint of the young protagonist Rushdie, dedicated this book to his son from whom he was separate from some time. Many elements of the story deals with the problem of the consorship, an issue particularly pertinent to Rushdie because of fatwa against him backed by Ayatollah Khomeini. The book is highly elusive and puns in multiple languages. ठीक है. So this kind of a story is here. Harrod and the Sea is an allegory for the several problem existing in the society today, especially several problem existing in Indian society subcontinents. So Indian society subcontinents में there are especially several problems and we have discussed in this story, and it looks at the problem from the view of the young protagonist Rushdie. So the protagonist is Rushdie and dedicated this book to his son from he was separated for some time, and many elements of the story deals with the problem of consorship, an issue particularly pertinent to Rushdie because of the fatwa against him backed by the Ayatollah Khomeini, and this book is highly elusive and puns in multiple language. तो ये बुक जो है बहुत हाईली एल्यूसिव है और ये बहुत ही मल्टीपल लैंग्वेज में ट्रांसलेट की गई है. At the beginning of the story, the protagonist of the Harun Khalifa lives with his father, Rushdie, the famous storyteller, and the doctor, or his mother Soraya, until the latter is seduced by their neighbors, Mr. Sengupta, to leave home. Thereafter, Rushdie is hired to speak on the behalf of local politicians but failed his initial assessment. The two tenants conveyed to the valley by K. Courier, Mr. Bhatt, to speak for the snooty Butter and other politicians. So, at the beginning of the story, we can see that the protagonist of the Harun Khalifa lives with his father. ठीक है. And Rushdie, the famous storyteller, and the doctor or his mother, Soraya, until the latter is seduced by their neighbors, Mr. Sen Gupta, to leave home. ठीक है? And thereafter, Rushdie is hired to speak on the behalf of the local political but fails his entire assignment. The two tenants conveyed to the valley by K. Courier, Mr. Butt to speak for the snooty but another politicians. So यहाँ पे जो रश्दी है एक तो बहुत ही ग्रेट स्टोरी टेलर है एंड एवरीबडी वांट्स टू hire him for his political reasons also. So here Rushdie is the great storyteller. His stories are not real. He is someone are some people call him Shah Blah because they consider their stories are not true. ठीक है and some people call him ocean of notions because he has lots of stories and which are not real but people like them as he is a great storyteller and some politician hired him to for the election purpose and the political purpose in order to convince the public um, in order to convince the public towards them. That's why they hired the Rushdie. In the kingdom of Gug, King Chatterjee Prince Bolo Journal Kitab and the Walrus announces their plan for war against the neighboring kingdom of the Chup to recapture Bolo. Bathor Princess Rushdie joined them here, having witnesses um, Batshit kidnapping. Thereafter, Harun and his son companions joined the Guppy army of Page to Virtue, where they befriend Murada Khatam Shud and former second in command. So here we are going to discuss how the in the kingdom of Gupta King Chatterjee, the Prince Bolo Journal Kitab and the Varas announces their plan for the war against the neighboring kingdom of the Chuk to recapture Bolo Bathroid Rushdie princess and Rushdie joined them. ठीक है? How he has joined and politicians and in the kidnapping and here having witnesses backdated kidnapping. ठीक है? And thereafter Haron and his son companion joined the Guppy army of the Pace toward the Chuk and where they befriend Murada Khatam should form a second in command. So here we have discussed an incident where Rushdie and Haron both are involved with the politicians and become witnesses of the kidnapping and how they joined the Guppy army of face toward the Chop. And here we have some character sketches which are very important according to your examination point of view as well as your answer structure. So the Haron was the main protagonist of the story who was so young, curious, outspoken and courageous child. He struggled throughout most of the story with a form of attention defect deficit as his mother running away with Mr. Sengura Gupta at exactly 11 o'clock and under his influence he is unable to concentrate for a long period of time. But he eventually overcome his disorder at the climax and never to suffer from it again. And he and his father both are named after the legendary Caliph of Baghdad and Harun al-Rashid who features in many Arabian night tales. ठीक है? The surname Khalifa means actually Caliph. So here we discussed about the Harun The Haron, who was the main protagonist of the story and who was so young, furious, outspoken, courageous child, and he struggled out throughout most of the story with a form of attention defect, deficit, as his mother running away with the Mr. Gupta. So Mr. Gupta here is the neighbor of the Haron family, where they are living, and Mr. Gupta. Mm, and her mother both are run away at exactly 11 o'clock, and under its influence he is unable to concentrate for a long period of time. So इस वजह से हारून जो था mentally डिस्टर्ब हो गया था एंड वो कॉन्सेंट्रेट नहीं कर पाया था बहुत टाइम तक, बट ही इवेंचुअली ओवरकम हिज डिसऑर्डर। वो इवेंचुअली ओवरकम हो जाता है अपने इस डिसऑर्डर से एट द क्लाइमेक्स एंड नेवर टू सफर फ्रॉम इट अगेन, and he and his father both named after the legendary caliph of the Badba and Hourn al-Rashida, who features in many Arabian night tales. So both becomes a part of many Arabian night tales, and their surname Khalifa is actually the meaning is the caliph. So now Rashid, Harun's father, who was known as the Shah of Law and Ocean of Notions for his ability to deceive stories impromptu. Rashid is a professional storyteller, sometimes hired by the corrupted politicians to pursue constituented in their favors. ठीक है, तो उसे हायर किया जाता था, करप्टेड जो पॉलिटिशियंस होते थे वो उनको उसको हायर करते थे in order to convince the public in the favor of them, and in the favor of constituent and his attachment to his wife and to his son, and to his practices of the storytelling, and he was probably his greatest philosophical weakness. ठीक है, जो उसका स्टोरी टेलिंग था एंड जो उसकी वाइफ थी, both are become the weakness for him because he really like both of them, and it was probably his greatest philosophical weakness. So now his wife, Surya, was a Rashid's wife who is tired of imagination and leave him for the dull and the dreary Mr. Sengupta a neighbor. That she was becoming alienated from Rushdie implied early in the story, where she is said to have abandoned her songs. At the end of the story, she returned to Rushdie and revived her affection for her husband and son. So Surya, जो थी, she feeling so much neglection from the Rushdies because he is always busy in his work and try making lots of stories, and pupils called him oceans of notions, and some pupils called him the Shah of Blah, who really not like him, and some people really like him because he they listen their his stories very in a very interesting manner, and consider him as a great storyteller because he has lots of story to tell them. So Surya, jo whose Rushdie's wives were feeling so much neglected from him because Rushdie have no time for her and never giving never giving her any kind of attention, and that's why Surya run away Mr. Sen Gupta because she really needs some emotional attention towards her, but Rushdie is always busy in storytelling. That's why she run away with the Mr. Sen Gupta. So this incident happening at the exactly at the 11 o'clock, and Haron, the son of Surya, has suffering from the disorder for a long time just because of this incident, and but after that he he eventually overcome with it disorder at the climax, and Surya also feels her her affections, her relationship, uh, mm, mm, with her husband and son at the end of the story and return it to the Rushdie again, and comes to the Rushdie again and return it to the Rushdie again, and continues her relationship with her husband and as well as her son. So now Mr. Gupta was the neighbor of Rushdie and who was beloved with the Surya, who was wife of Rushdie, and as a rule of Mr. Gupta dissipates imaginations and the stories, which sets the stage for his latter appearance of the Kahani and antagonist Khazam Khazam Shud. So Mr. Gupta जो रश्दि के neighbor थे and run away with the Surya, Mr. Gupta start liking hmm, Surya, and he poisons her ears about the Rushdie because he always busy in storytelling and making show of law, and he considered himself ocean of notion and people also like him, but he really don't have any kind of time and attention towards her wife, Miss Surya. So Mr. Sen Gupta take the advantage of it and along with Surya at exactly 11 o'clock, and um, and their family is totally destroyed with this incident. And Mr. Gupta recipes imagination and stories, and will set the stage for his latter appearance of Kahani as antagonist. So here, Mr. Gupta is antagonist here and Khatam of Shur. So Miss Anita. Mr. Gupta obeys uh, Mr. Gupta's obeys talkative and self-important, overwhelming, emotional, generous wife, disappointed in her husband after he has loved with Surya. So Mrs. Anita जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा disappointed है Mr. Gupta से because he elopes with the Surya, and Mr. Nita, she is very talkative and very overwhelming, emotional, generous wife है and self important भी importance भी देती है अपने आप को, and she feels very disappointed with her husband Mr. Sen Gupta, who poisons the ears of Surya against the Rushdie because as he is always busy in his storytelling and he has never time for her, and run away with her. So the conclusion of this story: when Rushdie and the horror return home, the people of their city have become joyous to replace their customer misery. Surya has returned to her husband and son. The novel concludes with an appendix explaining the meaning of each major character names. So, जब रश्दि एंड हॉरर रिटर्न होते होम से अपने घर आ जाते हैं वापस, एंड द पीपल ऑफ देयर सिटी हैव बिकम joyous to replace their customary misery. So वहाँ के जो लोग होते हैं वो बहुत ज़्यादा खुश हो जाते हैं. And Surya has returned to her husband and son. Surya also returned to her husband and son. And the novel concludes with an appendix explaining the meaning of each major character name. So here we have the story all about the Harold and Rushdie and Surya, and there about the neighbors, Mr. Gupta and Anita, and how the Rushdie's activity of storytelling have become and the problem for him because as he lost his wife, and who he loves with the neighbors Mr. Gupta, and how the situation is there, and Rushdie at the end of the story realized her mistake, how he always busy in his work about the storytelling and all that thing. So now we have some question answer here. Why the Rushdie was so popular and what was the reason of his popularity? So as we have discussed about the character sketch of the Rushdie, and but you have to follow the whole structure. First of all, you write about the Harold and the Steve story, introduction is a story is of about the 90s children's by the Salman Rushdie, and it was Rushdie's fifth major publication, followed by the Satanic Verses, and it is the phantasmagorical stories that begin in a city so old and the ruinesses that it has forgotten its name. And Haron, now you have to give the introduction of the story. The whole story revolves around a family who Haron and the Sea is the story is an allegory for the server problem, and exiting in the society today, especially server problem exiting in the new society subcontinent. It's look at the problem from the view of the young protagonist Rushdie, dedicated his books to his son, from whom he was separated for some time. Many elements of the story deals with the problem of the consorship and issue and particular pertinent and to the Rushdie because of fatwa against him backed by the uh, Ayato Khomeini, and the book is highly exclusive and puns in multiple language. ठीक है तो secondly you have to give the introduction of the whole story of the Haron, and the whole story revolves around the city where people have several problems exiting in the subcontinent. Where at the beginning of the story, the protagonist of the Harun Khalifa lives with his father and Rushdie, the famous storyteller, and a doctor, and or his mother Surya, until the latter he surrounded by their neighbors, Mr. Sengupta, to leave home. Thereafter, Rushdie is hired to speak on the behalf of the local politician, but fail his internal assignment, and the two tenants conveyed to the valley by K. Courier, Mr. Buck, to speak for the Snooty and Button and other politicians. So, स्टोरी की जो स्टार्टिंग है उसमें हारून खलीफा और उसकी रश्दी का जो एक इंट्रोडक्शन है कि हाउ ही was how their family decided by their neighbor Mr. Sengupta to leave home, and how the story how the Rushdie is hired by the local politicians in order to convince the public in their favor. And here we have discussed an incident of the Harun and the Rushdie happening. Uh, they joined them. They're having witnesses batched kidnapping, and thereafter Harun and his companion joined the Gopi army of pages toward the Chup, and where they there be the friend of M- Murda Khatam Shud, former second in command, and you have to write the character sketch, which are the most important character sketch and main character sketch like Harun, Rushdie, Surya, and Mr. Sengupta and Miss Anita. The whole story revolves around their four character sketch. You have to write about that. Harun father. So we have already discussed about the character sketch. Just how the Harold was the main protagonist of the story, and who was very young, curious, and outspoken, courageous child. And he struggled throughout most of the story with a form of attention deficit. As his mother running away with the Sengupta exactly 11 o'clock, he under his influence he is unable to concentrate for a long period of time. But he eventually overcome his disorder at the climax and never suffered to from it again. फिर the character sketch of the Rushdie Harun's father, who was known as Shah of Blah, an ocean of notions for his ability to deceive stories impromptu, and Rashid is a professional storyteller, sometimes hired by the corrupted politician to pursue constant in the favor. His attachment to his wife and his son practices of storytelling, and he was probably his greatest philosophical weakness. His Surya was a Rashi wife who is tired of his imagination and leave for him the dull and the dear Mr. Sengupta, a neighbor, and that she was becoming alienated from Rushdie's implied early in the story. and where she is said to have abandoned her son, her songs. At the end of the story, she returned to Rushdie's and revived her affection for husband and son. Mr. Sengupta was the neighbors of the Rushdies and who was in love with the Surya, who was wife of Rushdie. As the rules of Mr. Sengupta dissipates imagination and stories, and this set of the stage for his latter appearance of the Kahani as the antagonist Khatam Shud. Miss Anita, Mr. Sen Gupta, obsessive, talkative, or self-important, and overwhelming and emotional, generous wife, and disappointed in her husband after he loves her with a soul. So, at the end of the story, we have a conclusion about that, and how the Rusty and Harrison returned to home, and people react towards them of the city is really very joyful and is very positive. And Surya has also returned to her husband and son. The novel concludes with an appendix explanation the meaning of each major character, how the each and every character is different from every character, and their roles in the story is most important thing. How he holds characters are, and the whole story revolves around their on these most important characters. And now we have the next question. How was the Mr. Sengupta poisoned the ear of Surya, wives of Rashtis, and laughs with her at the 11 o'clock? So, as we have discussed in the answer already, you have to follow the same structure. And here I'm going to discuss the main answer. And the main answer is that how the Rashti is always busy in his work and making lots of stories as people likes their stories, and their stories are not real, and he always busy in his work and his wife feeling very neglected from him, as he always busy in his work, so she feels very neglected. That's why she loves with Mr. Sengupta, because Mr. Sengupta have the emotional attachment with the Mrs. Surya, who is the wife of the Rushdie, and he poisonous. He taking the advantage of it, and he poisonous the Surya's ears and run away with her at the on exactly 11 o'clock. I hope you will like this video, which is very important according to your examination point of views. Um, you have to write this answer in the same structure. You can't escape even a single paragraph of this answer, because you have to explain everything in order to gain the maximum marks in your examination. Both questions are I have discussed at the end of the answer is both are very important and towards your examination point of views also. I hope you like this video. Thank you so much.